Everyone. My name's Aditi, and
And I'm Mega.
today for everyone watching online, we're going to be doing an abstract art workshop, and we have a very special guest. We're featuring Miss Gail Winbury, an artist based in New Jersey, so we're really excited for that.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Okay, so this is the agenda for today. We're going to start off with an introduction, then go into the history of abstract art, an introduction to our feature artist, Gail, and give instructions to our activity that has to do with this topic, as well as go into the interview, which is going to touch on a little bit of Miss Winbury's getting into art and why she chose her medium specifically.
Okay, so before we go any further, we just want to talk a little bit about who we are. So, Mega and I are a part of Project Cultural Canvas. We're an initiative that's working alongside the Department of the Attorney General and the Department for Civil Rights. So, our goal is kind of to spread awareness through different art forms. And by awareness, we want to end discrimination and bias within the state of New Jersey, or at least reduce it a little bit. So the way that we're doing that is through interactive workshops like what we're doing right now, talking to different artists around the state. We have a social media campaign, and this is all a culmination of community efforts. At the end of this, we're planning on having an art sale or an art auction, and all the proceeds for that are going to go to Rise Against Hate, which is a local nonprofit that's striving to end discrimination and pass civil rights based legislation.
Yeah, and our next workshop is going to be April 13th. This will be an in-person workshop at Plainsboro Public Library. So, what is abstract art? This is just a brief introduction of it, but abstract art doesn't try to repeat real-life objects exactly. It uses shapes, colors, and lines to express emotions, ideas, or mood. It's more of a feeling rather than looking realistic, and we have some depictions on the slideshow that you can look at.
So I
So, some
you yeah, no, you got it.
Okay, some examples are color study, which typically has squares with concentric circles. And
These are
wait,
just
Aditi, do you want
examples
to
of
like?
like the most famous abstract art paintings. So the first one, we go the way that the list is structured, it goes all the way down the left side of the screen and then all the way down the right side of the screen. So abstract art is a really big and popular growing art form. So on the top left, we have color study. On the middle left, we have composition with red, blue, and yellow. On the bottom left, we have black square. Then on the top right, we have Harlequin's Carnival. On the right middle, we have number five. And on the right bottom, we have orange, red, and yellow. So these are all really famous art pieces of this art style. And we encourage everyone watching to research, do a little bit like more digging into finding pieces that you like or you resonate with. Because the thing about abstract art is because it depicts feelings rather than more realistic approaches to art, like realism or other art styles, there's something that resonates with almost everyone.
So, going into the history of abstract art, early humans used shapes, lines, and patterns in cave art, which many of you may be familiar with, to express ideas and stories. So, in ancient cultures like Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China, they used symbolic and stylized art for religion and communication. Islamic and tribal art focused on patterns, geometry, and abstraction instead of realistic images. So, following this theme of representing symbols and ideas through art. Medieval art often showed spiritual ideas using symbolic colors and flat abstract forms, and Eastern art traditions valued emotion and simplicity over realistic detail, which influenced later art movements with abstract art.
So now we're going to talk a bit more about the modern era of abstract art. So after realism and what happened during the Enlightenment, artists began to move away from realistic art and focus more on emotions, ideas, and imagination. This led to new styles like Cubism and Expressionism, which use shapes, lines, and colors in brand new ways that hadn't been used before. But abstract art really became popular in the 20th century, which is the 1900s for those who don't know, with artists creating work that didn't represent exactly real objects. Some artists actually wanted to show feelings or moods, and others just express pure shapes and patterns. So abstract art was groundbreaking because it opened the door to so many modern and contemporary styles that have followed since. And
So
that leads us into our introduction of our featured artist today.
yeah, so we're gonna be asking Gail a bunch of questions, but just to give a little background, Gail Winbury is a New Jersey-based abstract artist with a background in psychology. Her art explores the emotional, physical, and psychological landscapes of human experience. She uses oil paint to express complex inner states that are often hard to put into words. And her work reflects themes like gender, morality, childhood memory, and currently the relationship between age and creativity.
So quickly before we get into our interview, we always like to have a little activity to do like while you're listening to the rest of this video. So today's activity is to be making your own abstract art. And you can do this in two ways. So first, what you're going to need is a paper, or if you really want to, a canvas. And you can use things like crayons, markers, colored pencils, or paint. Or if you really wanted to, you could just do it in a simple pencil on a piece of paper. And if you want to do the more music route, you can get a music player or play music on your laptop. So, one way to do this is start off by thinking, what does happy look like? Or any kind of feeling, and what colors and shapes do you associate with different kinds of feelings? So, on the right hand, we have more specifications. You can choose a feeling and draw or paint that feeling using only shapes, lines, or colors, because that's usually what abstract art is all about. Or another way you can do this is by depicting what different types of music make you feel. You can pick a different kind of music, like calm music, fast music, or dramatic music, and then draw what that music feels like to you using shapes. So now we can go ahead into our interview.
Mhm.
Ega, you can kick things off.
Okay, so our first question is what was it that first made you want to go into art?
I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up in Livingston when it was the country. And from the time I was a really little girl, I used to paint with my father in the basement of our house. So that was really what started it for me. And I remember one thing, it was oil painting, and I guess he had been taking classes. And the one thing he said to me that always stayed with me was, "You're the one with the imagination." Because I didn't know the rules. And because of not knowing the rules, I did things that someone who at that time would have been more rule bound wasn't able or willing to do.
Yeah, that's great. And that really ties into what you do right now, which is abstract art, which definitely is not defined by any rules. So, why did you choose abstract art specifically?
It took me a long time to begin to paint abstractly because I think abstract art is probably one of the hardest art forms, at least in terms of painting. Um, And I think you know that I have a background in psychology, and I think that abstract art is an incredible, particularly painting, is an incredible vehicle for holding emotions and representing things that we may not have the verbal language to express. Historically, abstract expressionists thought that what they painted was universal. I don't think what I'm painting is universal. However, I do think what I paint touches people in a deep core level. And that's part of what drew me to it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I've looked at some of your art before and I absolutely love it. So this is just me like gushing for a second, but
Thank you.
you talked a bit before about like a
Mhm.
lack of rules that you experienced with your dad growing up and in abstract art. Did you find that kind of scary when you first started, especially living now in a world where we're so defined by, especially in high school where we're at right now? You wake up, you do this, this is what your assignment should look like, so on and so
Yeah.
forth.
Okay. As a child, it wasn't scary for me. because I didn't know what the rules were. So I was just doing what made sense, what felt natural. But as I began to study art more as an adult, abstract art was terrifying for me because there was nothing definitive to hold on to. And I wasn't ready to begin to paint abstractly until I learned certain things about representation. When I learned things about representation, then I was able to shift. But ironically, I'm about to do a show in New York with two other artists, wonderful, wonderful, talented artists. And the name of it is Reinventing Rules. And that's the title of the exhibition. I have to provide limitations. I have to limit how, what I'm going to do in my painting. So I may keep color consistent. I may limit my palette. Right now, I'm working only on canvas. By having certain limitations, that gives me an enormous amount of freedom.
Yeah.
Oh, and I want to say one other thing. Obviously, and I don't know if the people watching can see me, I'm significantly older than the two of these young women. And one of the things that I've learned is as you get older, and I'm talking about older, I'm not talking about turning 30 or 40, there really, for women, is a freedom that comes. And the freedom has something to do with just not caring as much about what other people think and not caring as much about what the rules are. So that is my answer.
Um, right now I'm taking AP Psych, and we just finished social psych as the unit.
Yeah.
So we learned a lot about like the id, the ego, the super ego, and like the unconscious mind. And there's so much to it that you don't really know at first. And there's so much that's beyond the surface, beyond like what we can even reach, that I feel like abstract art has a way of being able to convey that words can't. Um,
We are in complete agreement. I mean, I think it really taps into nonverbal, what, if you think about things from a Freudian perspective, pre-Oedipal, pre-language based experiences that are very human and most people experience in some way, whether it's sadness, whether it's loss, whether it's feeling giddy or in love, but may be difficult to really put into verbal language unless you're a poet.
yeah. So do you have any specific piece of yours that's your favorite, or anything that you've taken inspiration from other artists?
Oh, yeah. Um, Well, first of all, I studied for about 15 years with a Chinese American artist who is an abstract expressionist. And even though at the time I wasn't ready to paint abstractly, I knew what she was doing. And I'm going, I don't know if people can see me, but I'm making this huge gesture. Her painting was body size. And I knew that there was something about that that was really important to me and really compelling. And I work very large. Um, I'm going to ask you to repeat the question because I kind of was wandering for a minute.
Yeah. So do you have any favorite piece of your own or of some other
Okay,
artist?
absolutely. Okay, so the reason I started there was that Dorothy Young was the woman that I studied with, and I certainly was very influenced by her work. But in terms of people who are in the canon, I think the two artists who were most influential for me were de Kooning and then Joan Mitchell. I mean, obviously, I love Rembrandt, and I think that Rembrandt can represent a humanity better than probably any artist that ever lived. But in terms of how I work, those were the two artists that really influenced me a lot. In terms of my own work, I work in series, and I have a series that I thought was tremendously important. And so important that I spent a good amount of time trying to find a museum to show the work in. And that's probably my favorite series. And I actually did have the museum show at the Wilson Museum in Vermont. But it was very important because it really put together psychology and art and was autobiographic. And it was an abstract representation of childhood and of my childhood. And there are probably three pieces from that series, which are my favorites. I have them on I could bring them up, but you'd have to share the screen, and I don't know if we want to do that. I think that they are very powerful. There's a beauty to them. One of them is terrifying. It's called The Fearmonger, and it's 60 inches tall and is a painting that when people look at it, they feel fear. And it was about a frightening memory of being a young child in relationship with a tall, scary adult. But the other two that are my favorite from that series are much more benign. One is based on a Japanese fairy tale that was about a little boy who was an artist and a rebel. And it sort of represented my journey in becoming an artist. There's work I'm working on right now, but I'm way too close to it to say that it's my favorite.
Mhm.
I don't have the distance yet.
Is this what you were talking about, the fear monger as the wait, let me can you see it now?
Ah, yeah. Okay. It's the one right there.
Hmm.
And if you're in relationship to it, and that's in part why I work large, the body really has to engage with this very, very large, powerful image. So the painting itself is about 5 feet tall.
Wow.
Well, that's part of what I do, that I really have an embodied practice, and I want the viewer to have an embodied experience, to be standing in front of the painting and feel something in not just emotionally, but in their entire being, in their physical being as well. Another one of my favorites is her favorite fairy tale.
Hmm. Um, and when you decide that you want to go into art, did you face any initial pushback from family or loved ones and those around you?
Absolutely. I wanted to go to art school, and my mother, who had wanted to be a physician but was not allowed to because of her gender, said to me, a woman has to support herself. And that was, in retrospect, very good advice. And I also love psychology. So I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. It was later in life that I returned to um, art. And interestingly enough, my friends and colleagues who are psychologists initially had a terrible time accepting that I was no longer primarily a psychologist, but was an artist. I mean, now they're used to it, but it was very hard for them.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know it's really hard for a lot of people, like nowadays, now that we're in high school and we're about to apply to college and everyone's thinking about what do I want to do for the rest of my life? It's so easy to get funneled into thinking there's only one set path to fulfillment.
No. I really think that life is a journey. I mean, that's a very trite thing to say, but in reality, when you, barring tremendous poverty, because you have less options when you're struggling economically, there are choices. And I was a psychologist from the time I studied when I was 25, later in and continued. But I had always wanted to pursue my art professionally. And so at some point, with support, I said, I'm going to make that transition. And there are many people I know who have changed careers. I do think my mother's advice in some ways is important, that it's important for a woman to have autonomy. And part of that is financial autonomy. But if you can combine that with doing something that you love, that's the best.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And such a drastic change in career had to have been so difficult. And I know that, like, I feel as though there's been a decline in the arts because of what an emphasis there is in, getting a high paying job or, what the traditional route. So being able to pursue art is really
The
beautiful.
pressure to just like go into corporate America.
Yeah.
I'm guessing that you all feel that perhaps more than I did. I mean, I came from a family where I was encouraged to be a professional, but I was stubborn, so I was only going to do something that I really enjoyed.
Mhm.
I think some women may feel more pressure that they have to fulfill their parents' dreams.
Yeah. And I think that
Art,
goes really
I,
well. Oh, sorry, continue.
oh, I was just going to say that um, art is under attack right now. I mean, I don't want to get into a whole political thing, but currently in this day, there's no question. And I used to work at Rutgers years ago, and the people who are going to Rutgers, a lot of them were first generation, and they felt tremendous pressure to earn money and to be what their parents wanted them to be.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
yeah, so
What you were talking about earlier, like growing up in a different environment, how important do you think it is to highlight different cultures and include advocacy through art?
I think it's very important. And I have to say that my work is not overtly political. There are artists that do that. But one of the ways I can use my art for the greater good and for advocacy is what we're doing right now is by I donate some of my work for fundraisers to Planned Parenthood, to the Visual Arts Center, etc. So I think that it's tremendously important that it can affect people and make change, whether it's for raising money or whether it's affecting someone internally. I do have some pieces that are more feminist, but I would say that my art is feminist because I live in a female body in this particular culture. I think that cultural expression in art is very important. Um, there's a woman in New Jersey, and I am not remembering her name. She's of Indian origin, and she paints in a way that I would never know how to because she's bringing something from her culture, or someone who's from Iran who might be bringing a certain kind of Iranian painting that I never learned how to make. So I think that art can expose us to people and cultures that might not be, in our daily life or we haven't been exposed to before.
I mean, that was one of the biggest reasons why we wanted to do this in the first place, which was to share different cultures and share different art forms and, you know, reduce discrimination by showing the beauty in all of these different types of art from different areas. Um,
Now, I could respond to that unless you want to ask me a question first.
oh, go ahead.
Okay, in terms of discrimination, I think I will go on a soapbox for 1 minute. I'm an older woman, and it is difficult for women in general in the art world to get the same kind of recognition that male artists do. But it is particularly difficult as women get older because unless we are 95 to 100, and then we're perceived as being rare and more interesting. But I do think that there's discrimination that still exists for female artists. And if you can read a wonderful biography on Joan Mitchell, and that was from, I guess the author was writing about the 1950s and 60s, and she writes about discrimination that she experienced as an artist, particularly a female artist.
Yeah.
We'll definitely be taking a look at that because we want to like learn all that we can about what different groups of artists have been through, and we want to share that. So on your website, you mentioned that you really love oil paints, and earlier you said that you started by painting with oil paints. So could you explain what about that specific medium draws you in?
Yes, it is, from my perspective, the most sensual kind of painting material there is. There's just something very pleasurable uh, that's different from acrylics. Acrylics are plastic.
Mhm.
Yeah.
They, they dry like that. Oil takes a long time to dry. So there's more of a relationship with the paint. The colors that oil paints are able to achieve, I think, have more luminosity, more light and beauty than other kinds of paints.
It's
So
really a
that
beautiful
is
medium. Yeah.
you paint?
I don't. I wish. I've dabbled before, but I'm not very gifted in the visual arts. So
Um,
I just had one last question before we have to wrap things up here. When you start a painting, how exactly do you start? Like what idea is behind the painting? Do you start with maybe an emotion or a color or a memory? Could you explain your painting process a little
Yeah.
bit?
Yes, I can. And I just want to reiterate that I do work in series, so it to some degree depends on the series. But generally, what I do is I start with a large blank canvas and I put on a ground of mixed pigment. And I'd say for about the last, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years, I'm using colors that are comparable to my skin tone, in part because I think a lot about the body and flesh. And once I have the ground on the painting, I then generally take charcoal and I make random marks in the wet pigment with charcoal. And those marks eventually I turn into forms. So I'm letting my body lead the movement that becomes part of the painting. I'm not thinking. I don't have a concept in mind. I have a belief that what I feel and what I have experienced in life is transmitted through my body, through that charcoal I'm drawing right now, through that charcoal mark that I'm making on the canvas. And then once I have the form and I begin to think about composition, then I actually lay in pigment. And my initial moves are kind of intuitive. My initial color choices are intuitive, but it's a little bit like call and response. So I put a mark down and then I have to respond to that mark. And there's this sense of going back and forth for an hour, for 2 hours, just engaging with making marks, putting in color, and not thinking, staying out of the critical analytic, logical, rational part of my brain so that I'm not censoring what I'm doing on the canvas. I may 2 days later step back and say, wow, I need to change that, or I want to edit this or that in it. But that's my process.
So well thought out.
Well, there's a reason for that. And, we were talking a little bit before about career changes, and I'm in graduate school right now. I'm getting my MFA in fine arts in inter
Congratulations.
thank you. And so I'm in the midst of writing my thesis. So a lot of what you're asking me is really at the forefront of my mind. So
Well, thank you so much for sharing all that with us. It's gonna be like our minds are gonna be like chewing on all this to think about throughout the day.
yeah,
good.
I think there's a lot of misconceptions about abstract art, and this really opened at least my eyes personally about how much goes into it and the behind the scenes.
Yeah. It's a very difficult art form. It takes a long time. Thank you. It was really a pleasure meeting you both.
Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much.